I'm going to invite the bell to sound once more. During our joys and concerns, I see that I missed a couple of our prayers, and I want to share them. One was from Jane. She said, last weekend, my daughter and I put some potted herbs on our deck. It was nice to get outside and enjoy the sun. The other was from Honesty, who did our first reading. Pray for our country, which is dealing with racial divisions and protesting. As Scott shared, and as I shared at the beginning, the theme of today's program is inclusivity. And we planned this Sunday program for 2 weeks ago when Zoom went down across the country. And so since we didn't have an opportunity to share that then, we simply thought we would push it back up to today. And as we all know, I couldn't imagine a more timely theme. The first reading that was shared from Matthew is often a troubling one for folks. The woman has a sick child, and the apostles say, send her away. She keeps shouting after us. She was a Canaanite. She was not one of the people of Israel. She was the other. Even Jesus himself, and this is what challenges us who profess the Christian faith, says, I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Jesus says, it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. Thich Nhat Hanh in that reading says, we are all gifted and cursed with what our ancestors have given us. Was it that Jesus was simply carrying forth the ancestors who would regard these Canaanite others as dogs? Perhaps he needed to learn, because if he is and was fully human, we fully humans need to learn from each other. Perhaps he knew what he was speaking. Perhaps it was just a bit of trickery to get this woman to respond. Regardless of how we look at that, the woman does respond. Even the dogs get the crumbs. Personally, I like to think that Jesus was capable of learning from this woman who was a foreigner, who was the other, who was different. Because he suddenly shifts and offers his healing. As a pastor, I speak with hesitancy this morning. I am not too wise, not wise at all. And I also come from the straight white male, middle class background. And we really need to be hearing the voices beyond those. But I am sitting here, and with all my limitations, I'm called to speak something and hope that it is something that comes from the spirit beyond me. It's what every minister hopes. A few things passed through my mind this morning. Most of us have seen the horrific video. I invite you to not just let it anger you, though of course it will. But I invite you to allow yourself to feel the deep sadness behind that anger. The deep sadness for George Floyd, desperately calling out. And I remind us this morning that 6 years ago, Eric Garner in New York, who may have been guilty of the crime of illegally selling cigarettes, was also calling, "I can't breathe," before he died. And when we see all that's happening in America right now, why the looting, the fires, the breaking of windows, one thing that occurs to me, or that comes into my mind, is that we saw that video in 2014 of Eric Garner. And there have been no criminal charges brought from that. Until very recently, the officer responsible was still on the force. Another thing occurs to me. I'm in no position to talk much about race, but I'm in some position to talk a little about class, which maybe is even more difficult for us in America. My father had an 8th grade education, grew up during the Depression with a single mom. And we ended up living in a beautiful 3-bedroom ranch home. I just visited it yesterday. My mom's still around. In a safe neighborhood with good schools. We'd vacation every summer. My dad died over 20 years ago, but near the end of his life, he said to me, he said, "Son, what would I be doing today?" He worked in a steel mill, made good wages. He said, "Son, what would I be doing today? A guy like me who's not a book learning kind of guy." He said, "I'd either be bagging your groceries or saying, 'Do you want fries with that?'" We live in a society where a person can work really hard, 40 hours a week, and be stuck in absolute poverty. While others are so wealthy. This is untenable. There are very few jobs like that one that my dad had. And for at least 40 years, we've been moving into greater and greater disparity. And we all have to take responsibility for that. Finally, the last thing I'd like to share is that Dr. Martin Luther King, as probably almost everyone knows, won the Nobel Peace Prize. And that transformed his life. He spoke of it, how he moved from being this national civil rights leader to this international leader for peace and change. And in his lifetime, Dr. King nominated just one person for the Nobel Peace Prize. Certainly, Dr. King knew almost all of the Christian leaders of the time and other political leaders. He nominated one person, a friend of his, a Vietnamese Zen Buddhist monk by the name of Thich Nhat Hanh. King said of Thai, they call him Thai, Thich Nhat Hanh. He's still alive, but he's had a stroke. He no longer speaks. King said that Thich Nhat Hanh is a holy man, humble and devout. His ideas for peace, if applied, would bring to the world would bring a monument to world brotherhood and to humanity. Thich Nhat Hanh said just a couple of years ago, the ideal of the beloved community has been his life's work. And I want to share with you, we had a reading from Thai today, but I want to share with you, if I can find it here. I can't find it. I'll do it from memory as well as I can. This is part of Thich Nhat Hanh's first mindfulness training. He says, seeing that harmful actions arise from anger, fear, greed, and intolerance, which in turn come from dualistic and discriminative thinking. I am committed to cultivating openness, non-discrimination, and non-attachment to views in order to transform violence, fanaticism, and dogmatism within myself and in the world. I may have misspoke at the beginning. He wrote, seeing that all harmful actions arise from anger, fear, greed, and intolerance, which in turn come from dualistic and discriminative thinking. What this friend of Kings says is that all harmful actions arise from dualistic, us versus them thinking. In this moment, we're all being pushed toward a view of us versus them. We're all looking and we're seeing them. No matter where you are on the spectrum, that's what we're all being told. Thich Nhat Hanh didn't make this up sitting in some nice middle-class home, spiritually reflecting. He came up with this during the war in Vietnam, when the Viet Cong accused him of being on the side of the Americans and the Americans accused him of being on the side of the Viet Cong. When he was asked if he was from North Vietnam or South Vietnam, he said, I'm from the middle. The injustices have to stop. Systemic change must occur. And at the same time, we're invited into there being no other, no dogs, no them. And when we see that video of George Floyd or Eric Garner or anyone else, we are invited not just into anger, though that anger is real and understandable. We are invited into our hearts so that we can help to transform. Jane will lead us in meditation. Scott will have some closing words. Scott will have some closing words. I'll have a closing prayer, and then Jeff will end with music. In the best of times, we are here to bring healing, to bring justice, to add to the good. It is always our work. I'll do the bell and then we'll have Jane. And I thank you for sitting with us this morning